They thought 22 years could be folded into a single command, signed away like a routine form under fluorescent light and executive impatience. But some sentences don't end a career. They turn pressure into evidence and authority into exposure. The executive floor always had its own climate, not temperature, control. The air was cooler there, thinner somehow, filtered through glass, polished stone, and the unspoken belief that decisions made above a certain height automatically became correct. Even the silence had layers to it, not peaceful silence, managed silence, the kind that settled over conference tables before difficult conversations and stayed long after the damage was done. She knew that silence well. 22 years in the company had taught her how to read rooms before anyone spoke. She could tell when a meeting was real and when it was theater. She could tell when a compliment was a setup, when a calendar invitation was a warning, when a phrase like quick conversation meant somebody upstairs had already chosen the outcome and was now selecting the wording. That morning, the email had arrived at 8:12. No greeting beyond her name, no context beyond a time, no subject line beyond executive review. Short messages were always the most expensive. She read it once at her desk, once again while the office around her hummed to life, and a third time in the reflection of her dark monitor after she'd closed everything else. Around her, keyboards clicked in staggered rhythm. Printers breathed out neat stacks of paper. Somewhere behind the glass partitions, someone laughed too loudly at something that wasn't funny enough to justify it. Normal sounds, ordinary morning. But she had spent too many years inside corporate machinery not to recognize when the gears had shifted half a turn. She stood, straightened the sleeve of her blouse, and reached for the folder she hadn't needed in months, but never moved far from her desk. Not because she expected war, because experience had taught her that calm people survive longer when they prepare quietly. On her way down the corridor, people looked up and then immediately back down. That was the first signal. No one said anything unkind, no one needed to. Offices rarely announce their tensions directly. They leak them through eye contact, through delayed greetings, through the careful way colleagues suddenly become very interested in their screens. A junior analyst near the corner gave her a smile that arrived a second too late. Someone from operations opened their mouth as if to say something, then decided against it and reached for a coffee instead. The building was talking, just not out loud. At the elevator bank, the mirrored doors reflected her in duplicate: calm face, steady shoulders, badge resting against dark fabric, the exact posture of a woman who had spent years mastering the art of never showing a room what it wanted to see. When the doors opened, she stepped inside alone. The ride up was silent except for the soft mechanical hum and the faint, elegant music piped through speakers no one ever noticed until they were trapped with their own thoughts. Floor numbers lit up one by one, a vertical countdown dressed as progress. She remembered her first month in the company, a different building then, lower ceilings, cheap chairs, a manager who still believed effort was visible and therefore rewarded. She had been younger, sharper at the edges, less fluent in the grammar of corporate caution. Back then, she thought loyalty worked like deposits in a bank, something accumulated, something measurable, something you could rely on later when things became unstable. It had taken years to learn the more sophisticated truth. Loyalty is often welcomed most warmly by the people most willing to spend it on your behalf. The elevator doors opened onto executive reception. This floor never smelled like the others. Downstairs, there was coffee, toner, paper, perfume, the warm human scent of people actually working. Up here, there was expensive neutrality, cedar, glass cleaner, chilled air. A receptionist with perfect posture looked up, offered a professional smile, and told her they were ready for her. They, interesting, plural language in corporate settings was rarely accidental. They're ready for you meant alignment. It meant witnesses. It meant the decision had likely been socialized before the meeting began. She thanked her because courtesy costs nothing and followed the corridor toward Conference Room B. The hallway was lined with framed photographs from company milestones, ribbon cuttings, product launches, smiling executives holding plaques, handshakes preserved like museum pieces. She had been present for some of those moments. In a few of the older photographs, she was just outside the frame, the kind of person who made things happen, but was rarely positioned where the camera could celebrate it. That too had been part of the arrangement. Useful people are often kept slightly out of view. It makes them easier to overlook when the time comes. Outside the conference room, the frosted glass gave away almost nothing except silhouettes and motion. A shoulder turning, someone pacing once, then stopping, a hand lifting, likely adjusting cufflinks or a watch. She paused only long enough to smooth the corner of the folder in her hand, then opened the door. The room was already staged, a long table, water glasses aligned with geometric precision, a screen dark for the moment, waiting. Morning light stretched through the floor to ceiling windows in pale bands that made everything look cleaner than it was. At one side sat HR, expression arranged into something carefully sympathetic. At the far end, legal was not present, which told her almost as much as if they had been. And near the head of the table, one chair angled slightly back as though its occupant preferred dominance to comfort. The CEO, he was standing when she entered, not out of respect but momentum, one hand on the table, the other holding a pen he wasn't using. He gave her the kind of smile executives wear when they want history to remember them as reasonable. "Thank you for coming," he said. There it was, that polished tone, neutral on the surface, preloaded underneath. She took her seat without rushing, set the folder down, folded her hands once, loosely, not defensive, not deferential, simply present. Across from her, HR slid a single document closer to the center of the table, but not quite toward her yet. A theatrical delay, a visual cue before the line itself. The paper was face down, which meant the paper mattered less than the performance around it. A second passed, then another. The CEO glanced toward HR, then back to her, as if confirming timing. The room had that brittle stillness certain meetings develop right before language hardens into consequence. Air conditioned, quiet, expensive, and one sentence away from becoming dangerous. She had seen restructures before, reorganizations, voluntary transitions, titles removed, departments consolidated, exits choreographed with severance language polished until harm sounded like strategy. She knew the vocabulary, knew how institutions disguised pressure as process. Still, there was a particular chill when the machinery finally turned toward you. Not fear exactly, recognition. Because in that instant, memory moves fast. You remember the weekends, the launches, the emergencies solved at midnight, the executives protected from their own bad decisions, the years translated into stability for everyone except the person who carried them. And then you sit in a beautiful room and watch all of that get reduced to document weight and tone selection. The CEO placed the pen on the table. Small gesture, loud meaning. Then he said very evenly, "Let's make this simple." And suddenly, even the light in the room felt different, because simple in rooms like that almost never means fair. It means efficient. It means pre-decided. It means someone has mistaken authority for immunity. She looked once at the face-down paper, then back at him, and in the narrow silence before the next sentence arrived, something almost imperceptible shifted in the room. The kind of shift most people miss until much later, when they start retracing where exactly control began to slip. What he said next would sound final, but that wasn't the dangerous part. The dangerous part was what he assumed she would do with it. The CEO did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Power, when it has been rehearsed long enough, learns to speak softly and still expect compliance. His tone carried that polished executive restraint, the kind designed to sound reasonable in transcripts and brutal in memory. Hand in your resignation, he said. Just like that, no preamble, no elaborate framing, no strategic euphemism about transitions, restructuring, alignment, future direction, not even the decency of a lie dressed as regret. The sentence landed in the center of the table with the cold efficiency of something already approved elsewhere. Across from her, HR lowered her eyes for half a second, then lifted them again with a face arranged into practiced concern. A performance so familiar it was almost elegant, not empathy, optics. The document was turned toward her now. 2 pages, the first was resignation language, voluntary, immediate, professional, neat paragraphs designed to make coercion look administrative. The second outlined transition terms in the serene, bureaucratic style companies use when they want a departure to feel like a mutual decision rather than a forced erasure. There was even a pen placed beside it. Of course there was. The room didn't feel loud. In fact, it was almost unnervingly quiet. The hum of the ventilation system, the faint tick of some hidden clock, a car horn far below, softened by reinforced glass and altitude. But pressure doesn't require volume. Sometimes it arrives best in well tailored silence, sitting across from you in an expensive suit, asking for surrender as if it were simply good manners. She looked at the document without touching it. 22 years. How strange, she thought, that institutions can spend decades feeding on a person's discipline, judgment, discretion, and endurance, and then attempt to convert that entire history into a signature event before lunch. The CEO leaned back slightly, crossing one ankle over the other, with the ease of a man who believed resistance had already been accounted for. This is the cleanest option, he said. Clean, interesting word. Clean for whom? Clean for the people who wanted no internal conflict on record, clean for the board packet, clean for investor optics, clean for the storyline that would follow. A senior employee making a personal choice, a respectful separation, a smooth transition, no concerns, no pressure, no liability. Clean is one of corporate language's most dangerous disguises, because what gets called clean is often simply the version with fewer fingerprints. She raised her eyes from the document to him. Her expression did not change, and that seemed to unsettle him more than outrage might have. Anger is manageable, tears are useful, shock is expected, but composure introduces variables. I'm being asked to resign, she said. The question was calm, almost mild, no tremor, no accusation, just precise enough to require ownership. HR answered before he did, which told her something too. We believe this is the best path forward. Believe. Another elegant corporate verb. Belief without accountability. Opinion disguised as process. Language that hovers just above the level of proof. She gave the faintest nod as if she were listening carefully, generously even, and that small gesture encouraged them. People become careless when they mistake stillness for surrender. The CEO steepled his fingers. After everything you've contributed, we want to handle this respectfully. There it was, the tribute line, recognition deployed at the exact moment it had no measurable value. She almost admired the architecture of it. First the order, then the language of dignity, then the administrative exit, a controlled demolition performed under flattering light. But admiration and trust are not even distant relatives. She lowered her gaze again to the paper. The resignation letter had already been drafted in the first person. I hereby resign. I appreciate the opportunities. This decision reflects my personal choice. I wish the company continued success. How fascinating, she thought, to discover that even her voice had been prepared for her. For one fleeting second, something old and human moved beneath her calm. Not panic, not even hurt exactly, but a brief, sharp awareness of insult. Not because they wanted her out. Companies do that. Structures change. Leadership rotates. Power redraws maps. No, the insult was in the choreography, in the assumption that after 22 years, she would quietly place her own hand over the company's version of events and help them seal it. That was the part that glittered with arrogance. He mistook her professionalism for pliability, a fatal category error. Outside the windows, the city continued without permission from anyone in the room. Streets full of movement, deliveries, meetings, trains arriving, doors opening, traffic bending around temporary obstacles, as if the world itself had perfected the art of moving past disruption. The sight of it steadied her. Buildings teach strange lessons. The taller they are, the more the people inside them start believing gravity negotiates. The CEO tapped the edge of the paper once with two fingers, a tiny gesture, almost casual, but it carried impatience now. We'd prefer to close this today. Prefer, not require, not demand, just prefer. The velvet wrapping around the blade. She could feel HR studying her face, likely searching for signs, distress, anger, desperation, bargaining, something they could use to guide the next stage, offer a softened timeline, mention severance, invoke legacy, suggest that refusing would only make things difficult. There was a script for every reaction, but they had built that script around emotion, and she was no longer giving them any. Instead, she asked the question they least wanted asked in plain language. Is this voluntary? The room changed, only slightly, a nearly invisible fracture in rhythm. HR blinked once. The CEO's jaw tightened so faintly most people would have missed it. Silence entered the room like a third council no one had invited. Questions do that, especially clean questions, because once a sentence is spoken plainly, everyone present has to decide whether they are about to lie, evade, or document themselves into trouble. The CEO answered with measured irritation disguised as patience. No one is forcing you, he said. We're offering you a professional way to move on. And there it was, not an answer, a construction. She let the words sit between them. Offering, professional, move on. Corporate language has always loved corridors, phrases with walls on both sides, narrow enough to guide a person where you want them to go while maintaining the illusion they chose the direction. She rested two fingers lightly on the paper and, for the first time, pulled it closer. HR seemed to take that as progress. The CEO did too. You could feel it in the room, that minute relaxation among people who believe the event is returning to script. There is a very specific kind of carelessness that enters powerful rooms the moment they think they've won. It is almost luxurious. She read the resignation letter fully now, line by line, without rushing. The language was polished, but the seams showed if you knew where to look. Personal decision, immediate effect, Mutual professionalism. Every phrase built toward one legal ambition: erase pressure, erase context, erase the room itself. But rooms leave traces, especially when the wrong people underestimate who is paying attention. She reached for the pen. No one spoke. The CEO leaned back farther now. HR's shoulders softened. Somewhere in the corridor outside, footsteps passed the conference room and faded. Inside, the moment arranged itself into something prematurely triumphant. She uncapped the pen and paused. Not long, just enough, because timing, she had learned, is the difference between a reaction and a record. Then, instead of signing, she turned the page slightly, adjusted the paper into a cleaner angle, and wrote one line beneath the prepared text. Only one, a single sentence, no dramatics, no accusation in bold, no speech, just a line so measured, so surgical, that the air in the room seemed to narrow around it before either of them had fully understood what she had done. HR's eyes dropped first. The CEO leaned forward, and for the first time since she entered the room, neither of them looked in control. What that one line said was not loud, but it was enough to change what the document meant and who now owned the risk. If you've ever seen power dressed up as professionalism, you already know how dangerous quiet pressure can be. Subscribe, like, and tell me in the comments, have you ever watched one sentence in an office change who actually held the risk? The sentence was simple. That was what made it lethal. No flourish, no legal theater, no emotional punctuation designed to impress the room. Just one clean line added beneath the company's polished resignation script in handwriting steady enough to look almost serene, submitted under instruction and objection, not voluntary. For a moment, no one moved. The conference room, with its glass walls, curated light, disciplined furniture, and executive confidence, seemed to hold its breath around 8 handwritten words. The city beyond the windows still moved. Cars crossed intersections. Sunlight slid along mirrored facades. Somewhere, a phone vibrated against wood. But inside that room, time tightened. HR read the line first. You could see the exact second her training collided with comprehension. Her posture changed only slightly, but in executive environments, slight changes are thunder. The shoulders drew back, the expression emptied, concern vanished, replaced by calculation. She was no longer performing empathy, she was auditing exposure. The CEO reached for the document, slower than a startled man, but faster than a calm one. He read the added line once, then again. The second reading always tells the truth, because the first is surprise, the second is consequence. His face did not collapse dramatically. He was too practiced for that. Men like him build entire careers on controlling the muscles around their eyes. But something in his expression hardened and thinned at once, like polished glass just beginning to reveal a crack. That was unnecessary, he said. Unnecessary. Interesting. Not inaccurate, not inappropriate, not false. Unnecessary, which in rooms like that often means disastrously accurate. She placed the pen down with deliberate care, aligning it parallel to the edge of the paper. A small act, neat and almost domestic in the middle of corporate tension. But order has its uses. It makes panic easier to spot in other people. I prefer precision, she said. The sentence landed quietly, too quietly to be dismissed. Across the table, HR reached out as if to take the document, then stopped halfway, apparently realizing that touching it too quickly might look defensive. That hesitation was brief, almost invisible, but it was there. And hesitation, once introduced into a room built on authority, spreads fast. The CEO exhaled through his nose, a sound so controlled it almost passed for composure. This is not how professionals handle transitions. There it was again, the word professionals, worn now like a club instead of a compliment. She looked at him, calm enough to unsettle. With respect, she said, being told to resign is not a transition, it's a directive. No one interrupted her. That mattered, because silence changes meaning depending on who controls it. Earlier, the room's silence had belonged to them, choreographed, managerial, strategic. Now it had shifted shape. Now it was listening. Now it was weighing language. Now every word spoken in that expensive room risked becoming part of a pattern no one had intended to create on paper. The CEO stood, not fully, just enough to change his height relative to the table, as if the body might recover what the sentence had taken from the narrative. He placed one hand on the polished wood and leaned forward slightly. No one is coercing you. He said it too fast. That was the mistake. Fast sentences in executive rooms usually mean one of two things: anger or fear. And he was still too disciplined for visible anger, which left the more interesting option. She tilted her head just slightly, not in mockery, not even in challenge, but in that precise way people do when they invite someone to hear themselves more clearly. Then you won't object to my clarification on the record? HR stepped in now, voice smooth but tighter than before. Perhaps we should pause and revisit the wording. Wording, another elegant little shelter used when facts become uncomfortable. Wording means, let us rearrange the furniture before anyone notices the foundation moved. But the moment had already escaped containment. The handwritten line existed. The original letter existed. The request existed. The room existed. And most importantly, there were now three people sitting in direct proximity to a document that no longer described a clean resignation, but an attempted one, complicated by objection, timing, and authorship. The CEO turned to HR with the faint irritation of a man forced to share a crisis he had hoped to manage alone. We're overcomplicating this. No, she thought. You simplified it too aggressively. That was the problem. Institutions often fail not because they lack intelligence, but because they become addicted to frictionless outcomes. They start believing that tenure can be erased neatly, that loyalty can be converted on demand, that pressure becomes lawful if spoken in a sufficiently expensive room. And because that belief works often enough, it becomes habit. Habit is where arrogance goes to become policy. She did not say any of that. She didn't need to. Instead, she folded her hands lightly and waited. Waiting is its own kind of architecture. Most people use it poorly because they fill it with explanations, apologies, self defense, but disciplined waiting creates space in which other people rush to repair themselves, and in rushing, reveal structure. HR cleared her throat. We may need legal to review the document language before proceeding. There it was, the first retreat disguised as prudence. The CEO did not like it. You could see that immediately. His chin lifted a fraction, his fingers pressed once against the tabletop. He had entered the meeting expecting execution, not escalation. He wanted the matter completed before lunch, packaged before rumor, contained before anyone had the chance to ask why a woman with 22 years of institutional memory had suddenly decided, supposedly voluntarily, to vanish. Now, the room had changed categories. This was no longer an exit, it was a file, and files travel. She stood then, not abruptly, but with the measured grace of someone rising from a table she had no intention of treating like a courtroom unless forced. She lifted the document, glanced at it once more, then set it back down in the exact center between them. I'm happy for legal to review it, she said. Happy, a beautiful word in the wrong place. The CEO looked up sharply, hearing the irony but unable to challenge it without acknowledging the shift. HR tried again, gentler this time. Perhaps it would be best if you took the afternoon? Again with the soft verbs. Best. Perhaps. Took. Corporate institutions love passive phrasing when they're trying to blur ownership of a mess. She reached for her folder. Of course. Then, after the smallest pause, she added, "Please send me the reviewed version with all revisions preserved." This time, the silence was immediate and complete. That request did more than complicate things. It named the battlefield, tracked revisions, version history, document trail, editorial fingerprints, a map of how force gets softened into policy language. The CEO's expression cooled, truly cooled now. Less irritation, more threat management. He was recalculating her, not as a departing employee, but as a variable with memory, discipline, and enough procedural fluency to make shortcuts expensive. "You're making this adversarial," he said. No. The sentence almost rose on its own, but she let it stay behind her teeth for a moment before answering. "I think the room did that before I picked up the pen." And that was the line that ended the meeting. Not because it was dramatic, it wasn't. Not because it was loud, it wasn't. But because it stripped the decor from the event. It took the glass, the title, the process language, the executive posture, and reduced everything to a plain truth no one in the room could comfortably improve with synonyms. HR looked down. The CEO said nothing. And in some offices, silence after a sentence like that is more revealing than any admission. She walked out without hurry. The executive corridor felt different on the way back. Same cedar toned neutrality, same polished floors reflecting long bands of morning light, same framed photographs of milestones and leadership triumphs. But once you've watched a room lose command of its own script, architecture changes. Hallways stop feeling impressive and start feeling theatrical. Doors stop looking powerful and start looking temporary. At reception, the assistant glanced up, perhaps expecting closure, perhaps already sensing the texture of the air around people leaving certain meetings. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Something unreadable passed there, not knowledge exactly, but recognition. Offices are ecosystems of almost knowing. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. She stepped inside alone again. This time, as the doors closed, she saw her reflection framed by brushed metal and vertical light. Same posture, same calm face. But now there was something else around her. Not triumph, not relief, not even certainty, just alignment, the kind that comes when instinct, experience, and timing finally lock into place. As the elevator descended, her phone vibrated, once, then again. No preview visible yet, just the screen lighting up inside her bag like a pulse. She didn't check it immediately, not because she wasn't curious, because after 22 years, she knew the difference between a message and the beginning of fallout. And somewhere above her, in a conference room that had looked flawless an hour earlier, people were no longer discussing her resignation. They were discussing the sentence she added and who exactly had created the risk it now described. By early afternoon, the office had developed that particular kind of quiet that only appears after something important has gone wrong in a place built to prevent visible mistakes, not silence, something more intelligent than silence, a lowered volume ecosystem of half finished conversations, delayed replies, closed doors, and carefully neutral faces moving through corridors as though neutrality itself might be contagious. The kind of atmosphere where people suddenly stop speaking when someone passes, then resume with softer consonants and more cautious verbs, where email subject lines become shorter, where assistants look up from their screens a fraction too quickly, trying not to look like they are waiting for news. She had returned to her desk at 11:07, not dramatically, not with the pace of someone fleeing a confrontation or marching toward one, just the same measured walk she had used for years, shoulders steady, expression unreadable, badge resting against fabric, as if nothing more unusual had happened than a delayed budget review. That was part of her discipline. Offices are full of people who confuse visible emotion with meaningful damage. They think the story begins when someone raises their voice, or slams a door, or leaves with red eyes and trembling hands. But the deepest shifts in power rarely announce themselves that way. They arrive quietly, through documents, through phrasing, through one sentence added in the right place at the wrong time for the wrong people. Her computer screen woke as she sat. Inbox, calendar, three unread internal emails, one new meeting request already canceled before she could open it. Interesting. She placed her bag down, removed her phone, and finally looked at the missed vibrations from the elevator. Two messages. One from an old colleague in compliance who almost never texted during business hours. Another from someone in operations who had survived three restructures and, because of that, had developed the instincts of a storm bird. The first message read, "Heard legal was called upstairs. You okay?" The second was shorter, "Don't put anything in writing yet." She looked at the screen for a moment longer than necessary, not because she was surprised, because confirmation, even when expected, has a weight all its own. Around her, the office performed normalcy with admirable effort. Someone at the far printer cursed softly at a paper jam. A sales manager was laughing on a call in the glass room near the corner, too brightly, the way people laugh when they want clients to hear optimism more than truth. Two analysts stood beside a monitor pretending to discuss numbers while their eyes flicked once each in her direction, not rude, not obvious, just human. Information moves through companies faster than policy and slower than fear. What people knew by now was likely incomplete. Executive meeting, HR present, legal called, her return, no visible collapse. That alone would be enough to destabilize the building's appetite for a clean internal narrative. She opened the first unread email. It was from HR subject line, follow up. Of course, the body was concise, polished, and clinically vague. Thank you for your time this morning. As discussed, the document is under review. We will revert with updated language if appropriate. In the meantime, please refrain from distributing or characterizing the draft pending internal review. She read it once, then again, and on the second reading, the sentence revealed what it really was. Not a request for calm, but an attempt to control description, to slow the spread, to freeze the vocabulary before the event acquired a name it could not survive. She almost smiled. When organizations start asking people not to characterize something, it usually means the thing already has a character, and they have recognized too late that they do not own it. She did not reply immediately. Instead, she reached into the bottom drawer of her desk and removed a slim black notebook. Old fashioned, unshared, unsearchable, no cloud access, no accidental forwarding. Inside were years of dates, fragments, names, meeting times, phrases worth remembering, and the occasional sharp little observation she had learned not to store in systems owned by people with selective memories. She opened to a blank page and wrote, in neat print, 8:12 executive review email. Approximately 9 o'clock, CEO instructed resignation. HR present, prepared letter provided, added note submitted under instruction and objection. not voluntary. Post meeting, HR email requesting no characterization pending internal review. Nothing emotional, just chronology. Chronology is often the first language truth uses when it anticipates resistance. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was a call from a name she had not seen in months. Mara, former Deputy General Counsel, now external, now inconvenient for the company in exactly the way competence becomes inconvenient once it leaves payroll. She let it ring twice before answering. "Hello," she said. Mara's voice arrived low and direct, with none of the decorative concern people wear when they want information more than they want your well being. "I heard enough to know I'm calling for a reason," she said. "Are you alone?" That question mattered more than the greeting. "Yes." "Good, then listen carefully. Do not edit your own description of what happened. Do not soften it. Do not adopt their words because they sound more professional. If you were instructed to resign, keep saying exactly that." There it was. Clean advice, sharp enough to be useful. By the windows, clouds had shifted over the city, muting the afternoon light, so the office took on a flatter tone, less gleam, more outline. It suited the day. Some events don't need drama, they need contrast. "They've already sent a message," she said, "pending internal review, no characterization." A quiet exhale on the other end. Not surprise, recognition. "Of course they did," Mara said, "because characterization becomes evidence the second two people disagree about what the room was." The line went still for half a beat. "Did you keep the document?" "No, it stayed on the table." "Do you have the follow up email?" "Yes." "Good. Preserve everything." Not save, not keep, preserve. That was legal language, not administrative language, the vocabulary of materials expected to matter later. She leaned back slightly in her chair and looked across the open office. The ordinary workday continued, though with that new, brittle self consciousness that enters a floor when executive calm has been perforated somewhere above it. A director emerged from a glass office with a tablet in hand, walked 10 steps, then turned back as if he had forgotten why he'd left. An assistant passed carrying sparkling water that was almost certainly not for herself. A Slack notification chimed from someone's laptop and went unanswered long enough to feel intentional. Mara's voice cut through her observation. "You've spent years making them look organized," she said. "That's why this got miscalculated. People like that begin to believe the person who protected the system will also protect it from itself." That landed deeper than sympathy would have, because that was the true insult of mornings like this. Not merely that they wanted her gone, but that they assumed her professionalism would remain available to them even during extraction, that she would instinctively neaten the event, reduce the mess, contribute her restraint to the preservation of their version. She had done that for others before, covered panic with order, turned avoidable mistakes into survivable ones, quietly, expertly, without applause. Not this time. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Mara replied. "Just stay exact." The call ended. She set the phone down and let her hand rest over it for a moment, feeling the residual warmth against her palm. Outside, the muted sky made the glass buildings across the street look almost liquid, as if the whole financial district had been painted in cool steel and postponed certainty. Then came the next signal. At 1:43 p.m., her assistant calendar repopulated by itself, a new invite. Document review, 2:30 p.m., participants, HR director, associate counsel, employee relations, not the CEO. That omission was exquisite. When power retreats from direct conversation and sends process in its place, it usually means one of two things: escalation has been recognized, or accountability is being redistributed before impact. Either way, the architecture of confidence has changed. She opened the invite details, no agenda, no attachments, just a video link, despite the fact that everyone involved was in the same building. That made her sit back. Virtual meetings inside the same office are rarely about convenience. They are about geography, about limiting witnesses, controlling tone, avoiding corridor visibility, and sometimes creating cleaner records by putting everyone in separate boxes where expressions flatten and interruptions can be managed. They were adapting. Good. Adaptation is how institutions confess weakness without using the word. She accepted the meeting, not because she trusted it, because refusing would hand them a different narrative, and narratives are most dangerous when offered fresh territory. By 2:05, the whispers had matured into patterns. She could tell by how often people stopped by her desk for reasons too thin to survive daylight. Do you still have the March numbers? Were you copied on the logistics update? Do you know if the procurement file moved? No one cared about those things urgently. What they cared about was proximity, temperature, whether she looked shattered, whether she looked angry, whether she looked like someone preparing to leave the building with a cardboard box, or someone who had discovered where the exits actually led. She gave everyone the same gift: composure, measured answers, no commentary, no confession. A woman from finance paused half a second longer than necessary after asking about a spreadsheet, then said softly, "Good to see you." Not kind enough to be pity, not casual enough to be random. The office was choosing its language carefully now, and somewhere behind all that caution, a harder truth was forming, the one institutions hate most, the truth that once a forced story fails to become automatic, everyone starts rereading the people at the center of it. The CEO HR, the missing legal presence in the first meeting, the sudden review, the softened emails, the quiet summonses. People notice more than leadership assumes. They just wait longer to say it aloud. At 2:28, she closed her laptop. The screen reflected her face back at her, framed by muted office light and the fine geometry of a day that had shifted from pressure to pattern recognition. She straightened one page on her desk, closed the notebook, slid the HR follow up email into a personal archive. Not hidden, preserved. Then she joined the video call from 10 feet away from the people who had scheduled it. Boxes opened one by one: HR director, controlled smile; associate counsel, young, polished, careful; employee relations, expressionless in the way only trained professionals or exhausted witnesses ever manage. And before anyone spoke, she understood something with sudden, crystalline clarity. The company was no longer trying to make her resign. It was trying to redesign the moment it had asked. And once institutions begin editing the past before the day is over, it means the original version was more dangerous than they expected. The call began with corporate faces and careful lighting. Not one of them looked rushed. That was the first performance, because when institutions are threatened by their own earlier confidence, they rarely arrive looking frightened. They arrive looking organized. They smooth their tone, flatten their expressions, and dress uncertainty in procedural language. It is one of the oldest tricks in the corporate world. If the room sounds calm enough, perhaps the record will forget how the morning began. The HR director spoke first. "Thank you for joining on short notice." Short notice, a curious phrase considering the day had started with an ambush disguised as scheduling. On the screen, the associate counsel gave a professional nod, not warm, not cold, simply precise, younger than she expected, immaculately neutral, the kind of lawyer companies often place in front of difficult moments when they want intelligence without visible authorship. Employee relations remained still, hands folded, expression composed into bureaucratic stone. No CEO. That absence sat in the meeting like a fourth participant. The HR director continued, "We've reviewed the draft language from this morning and would like to clarify that the company is not requesting a resignation." There it was, the rewrite, not introduced as a contradiction, not framed as a reversal, just a clarification, as if reality itself had briefly suffered from poor wording and now required minor editorial support. She said nothing immediately. Silence, used correctly, is a scalpel. It makes people continue. And continue they did. Associate counsel leaned slightly toward the camera. To be precise, there appears to have been a misalignment in how the transition conversation was communicated. Misalignment, a beautiful corporate euphemism, softer than error, cleaner than misconduct, broad enough to hold almost any damage while naming none of it directly. The kind of word designed by people who have spent years laundering sharp events through velvet diction. She folded her hands in front of her desk. "There was no misalignment in what I heard," she said. "I was told to hand in my resignation. No emphasis, no drama, just plain sequence." On the screen, the HR director's smile thinned by half a degree. "We understand that may have been your interpretation." Interpretation. Now they were moving quickly, from clarification to misalignment to interpretation. The standard corporate descent away from fact and toward negotiable atmosphere. A badly played one, too fast, too visible, like watching stagehands rush across a set before the audience has agreed not to notice them. She looked at each face in turn, even though they were separated by screens and walls. Strange how digital distance can sometimes make a room feel even more revealing. People forget that cameras reduce body language but magnify pauses. "My interpretation," she said evenly, "was based on the instruction I received, the prepared resignation letter placed in front of me, and the expectation that I sign it immediately." This time, no one interrupted, because chronology is extremely rude to revision. The associate counsel glanced down, likely at notes, perhaps at the morning's email traffic, perhaps at some internal summary already stripped of its sharper edges. When he looked back up, his tone remained careful. "The company would prefer to move forward constructively." Prefer again, always prefer. Institutions love voluntary verbs when they are trying to recover from involuntary facts. "And how," she asked, "does the company define constructively?" A very small pause followed, the kind that exposes hierarchy even over video. HR answered, but only after legal had chosen not to. "We are prepared to withdraw the resignation document entirely," she said. "You may continue in your role while we evaluate appropriate next steps." That landed harder than the morning order had. Not emotionally, structurally, because reversals like that do not appear unless something upstairs has been reclassified from personnel issue to legal hazard. No executive voluntarily pulls back a clean exit unless the alternative has become more expensive than the original plan. Continue in your role. The words hovered between them with that surreal corporate sheen reserved for moments when power must pretend it was flexible all along. Hours earlier, the company had wanted her gone quietly. Now it wanted continuity, calm, and the illusion that no irreversible line had been crossed. Too late. The line existed, on paper, in sequence, in memory, and memory becomes especially dangerous when it remains composed. Outside her window, late afternoon light had shifted warmer, sliding across nearby buildings in long gold bands that softened edges without actually removing them. That, she thought, was exactly what the company was attempting now. Not to erase what had happened, just to warm it, blur it, make it look survivable under better lighting. But golden light still falls on cracks. She leaned back slightly in her chair. So the company is withdrawing the document presented this morning. Not a question, a pin. Associate counsel nodded once. Yes, and the request that accompanied it? The HR director looked at the camera too directly before answering, a classic sign of someone trying to seem straighter than the facts allow. We are not seeking a resignation at this time. At this time. There it was, the survival clause, not a denial, not an apology, not even a full retreat, just a narrowing of present intent carefully designed to avoid ownership of the morning while preserving future optionality. Elegant, cowardly, predictable. She almost admired the mechanics of it. Almost. Employee relations spoke for the first time, voice flat and measured. Our goal is to ensure a respectful working environment moving forward. Respectful. The room did not deserve that word, and everyone on the call knew it. But this is one of corporate life's most persistent delusions, that if the right noun is introduced late enough, it can retroactively disinfect the verbs that came before it. She held their gaze. With respect, she said, and the phrase carried just enough irony to make HR stiffen. A respectful working environment would have started before a resignation letter was drafted in my name. No one spoke. Then came the moment that mattered most. Not the withdrawal, not the softened phrasing, not the absence of the CEO, the apology that never arrived. That told her everything, because companies apologize when they believe they owe dignity. They correct language when they believe they owe protection. This meeting was not about remorse, it was about containment. The associate counsel cleared his throat lightly. We'd like to send a revised written summary after this meeting. Of course you would, she thought. Written summary, the post event architecture of damage control. A cleaner document, smoother nouns, safer timestamps, less oxygen, something that could later be forwarded, quoted, or produced without bleeding too visibly from the seams. She nodded once. Please do. And then, after the smallest pause, added, include that the resignation letter presented this morning has been withdrawn after review. HR's expression altered. Barely, but barely was enough. That was the second time that day a sentence had forced ownership back onto the people trying to keep it abstract. Associate counsel said, we can reflect that the draft will not proceed. No, there are moments when exact language is no longer a preference, it becomes the entire event. The letter, she said, was presented for my signature, then reviewed, then withdrawn. That is the sequence I'm asking you to reflect. The air on the call changed, not visibly. Digitally, these things register as stillness rather than sound, a delay in blinking, a glance down too soon, a mouth preparing a softer phrase and then deciding against it. The HR director finally spoke. We will circulate language for your review. There, another retreat. Small but real. Now they were not merely sending a summary, they were allowing review because by this point they understood the central problem of the day. Every time they tried to soften the event without her, she sharpened it with chronology. That is a terrifying thing for institutions to encounter in someone they expected to fold. The meeting ended 3 minutes later with standard phrases no one believed. Thank you for your time. We appreciate your professionalism. We'll be in touch. Corporate incense burned after the fire, as always. The boxes disappeared from the screen one by one until only her reflection remained, faint in the dark glass of the call window. She closed the laptop. The office around her was quieter now, not emptier, just more aware of itself. That happens after executive misfires. Buildings develop self consciousness, doors close more gently, conversations become shorter. People carry their bodies like they suspect the walls may already know more than they do. Her phone vibrated, an email, then another. The first was from HR and legal jointly. Subject line, meeting summary. The second was from a board liaison she had interacted with only twice in 12 years. Subject line, availability tomorrow. That one she stared at for a second longer. Interesting, very interesting. She opened the meeting summary first. It was exactly what she expected, smoother than truth, but not smooth enough. The resignation document was described as preliminary. The conversation was called exploratory. The morning directive had been converted into discussion around potential transition options. She read it once. Then she clicked reply and removed 3 words, replaced 4, and added one sentence at the end. For accuracy, a resignation letter was presented for signature during the morning meeting and later withdrawn following review. No accusation, no speech, no adjectives, just sequence. She sent it, then opened the second email. The board liaison's message was brief and almost offensively polite. Would you be available for a confidential discussion tomorrow morning regarding today's events? There are emails that feel like invitations, and there are emails that feel like the sound a structure makes just before internal accountability begins choosing its direction. This was the second kind. She looked up from the screen. Across the office, evening light was beginning to gather in the windows, gold turning amber, amber flattening toward dusk. People were packing bags, shutting laptops, making the small end of day gestures that signal ordinary life resuming. But ordinary life had not resumed, not really. It was only dressing itself that way until the next set of doors opened. 22 years. That was what they had tried to compress into one command, one signature, one clean narrative, one obedient ending. Instead, the day had expanded. The document had been withdrawn. Legal had entered. The language had shifted. The record had begun. And now the board wanted a conversation the CEO was no longer controlling. She reached for her coat slowly, not because she was tired, because she understood with the kind of cold clarity only experience can produce that the most dangerous moment for people who misuse authority is not when they issue the command. It's the day after, when the command survives, but the version of it they were counting on does not. Tomorrow would not be loud. It would be worse for them than loud. It would be precise. And somewhere above her, behind executive glass, under calibrated light, inside rooms built to make pressure look polished, someone was discovering that silence, when timed correctly, does not hide damage. It frames it. And this time, the frame was no longer theirs.